Blind Nil Audio.
I'm Alex L.
I'm Libby Delana. Welcome
to This Morning Walk podcast.
Hi, JR.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm well. I see you in your nice Arctic Fox shirt. Look what I
Yes,
have here. Yes,
right.
this is one of the ways we met. We both are
Exactly right.
Fjallraven friend. So,
That's why I'm wearing this shirt, you know,
uh,
because I know that we're both guides or ambassadors or whatever they call us.
no, lucky me to be in your company. So, welcome to This Morning Walk podcast.
Nice to see you again. Yeah.
It's so nice to see you. I was just thinking back. I'm actually on the West Coast. I'm in the Bay Area, and I was thinking that the first time you and I met was actually at a Whalebone magazine showing of your beautiful film called
In
Born
Berkeley.
Curious.
Yes,
Yes, in Berkeley. It's
Uh,
such a beautiful film. And I
Thank you.
remember thinking, I felt very fortunate to have spent a little chunk of that evening with you. It was really, really lovely. All right, walk stars. So we have J.R. Harris here, also known as the Red Hat Trekker. You have written what Backpacker magazine considers to be one of the top trekking books in the world. It's called Way Out There: The Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. You are the founder of JRH Marketing, which is also where you and I seem to overlap in our lives. You are an extraordinary member of the Explorers Club. And you're not just a member at the Explorers Club. Are you still leading a committee there?
Yes, I am chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and I'm also on the board of directors.
Oh, fantastic. I have to say the Explorers Club was someplace when I was growing up that I was always fascinated by. So to have met you was a real dream come true.
Not many people have that dream, I don't think, but I appreciate it.
Well, no, absolutely. So JR, will you walk us through how did you end up in here in this place in your life? You have walked out truly some of the great and most historic routes in the world. You grew up in New York. It's a beautiful story. Walk us through how you ended up here.
Well, I'll start out by saying I always love to walk. Number two, I always love being outdoors. And number three, I'm a curious guy. I was born curious and restless. And when I started backpacking back when I was in the Boy Scouts, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, uh, I discovered that by hiking, it seemed to me that that was the perfect pace. It was
Mm,
fast enough to get where I was going, yet slow enough that I could absorb all the things that I could see and hear, and things that were surrounding me, scenery and what have you. And and so I frankly, I walk almost everywhere. I live in New York City. I actually have a car, which very few people in New York, very few New Yorkers have. Although I don't drive it much because I don't need it, I like to walk. And so even though I live in the city, I walk. But yes, most of my favorite walks have been in the wilderness. And not only do I like to walk out there, I like the lifestyle because it's a much more simple life. You know, I
mhm.
like the idea of living with just what I can carry, whatever's in my backpack. That's all I have, and it's a much simpler lifestyle, which I love. And then finally, uh, there's the adventure of it.
Mm.
I like being out in the wilderness. I'm usually by myself, although I plan these trips meticulously. You know, you never really know what's going to happen. You know,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
the adventure side of it, and I like that as well.
Oh,
So
I
that's
love
my
that.
idea. Yeah, I've been doing it for more than 60 years. I've got at least, well, I got more than 60 treks that are at least 3 weeks. Not to mention, I don't know how many shorter ones I have. But yeah, I've been doing it, as I say, since since they right after they discovered dirt. That's when I was born. I was born the next day, so I'm almost older than dirt. And as soon as I could walk, I started walking. And now, at 80 years of age, I haven't stopped walking since the day I was born. Slight
So tell
exaggeration.
so tell us, I happen to know this beautiful story, but tell us how were you introduced to the outdoors for the first time? Living in New York, there are certainly beautiful places to be inspired by the outdoors, but it is not often how kids grow up in Manhattan or anywhere in the city. So how did that start? How did you get introduced to it?
Well, my family's working class. We lived in city housing projects here in New York City. And when I was a teenager, I was 13, 14, and my parents were a little concerned about growing up in the city, especially in the summer when school let out, and there were gangs and so forth back in the day. So they wanted me to get away from the city. And the way that they came up, the idea that they had was to sign me up, enroll me in the Boy Scouts, and send me away to summer camp in the Catskill Mountains. And I have to say I wasn't feeling it. Now, and my parents didn't send me up there because it was the great outdoors and it was fresh air and everything, because they had never been to the mountains. They had no idea. All they knew was that I would be out of the city and I
Mm.
would be with responsible adults who would make sure that I learned something, that I didn't get in any kind of problems or trouble or whatever. And so that was it. But I didn't want to leave the city. I wanted to stay in the city and hang out with my friends. And, back in the day, being a Boy Scout wasn't exactly what a street smart New York City kid wanted to be either. But when I got there, everything changed. Almost immediately, it was like I stepped off the bus and I was like on a different planet.
Mm.
There were mountains up there, the Catskill Mountains. I'd never been in the mountains. There were trees, lakes, there were grass. I tell people the first time I ever saw grass, I tried to smoke it. I mean, that's how it was growing up in the city.
Yeah.
But I learned how to be self-sufficient. I learned how to read a map and use a compass and make a fire and build a shelter, uh, and learn how to track animals and what you could eat out there. These are all skills I never knew existed growing up in the city. And so suddenly I'm a different kid now, and I knew that those skills, I probably weren't going to use them when I got back home, but I had them. And they fascinated me. And as soon as I got home, I told my parents, I want to go back next year. And they go, what are you talking about? We had to push you onto the bus to get you to go up there. Now, first thing, you're back home and you want to go back. I said, yeah, I want to go back. And I did go back. And I went back twice more. I went there 3 summers altogether. It was great.
And how old were you? What years? How old were you then?
13, 14,
Mhm.
15, right
Yeah.
up in there, those 3 years.
Yeah.
Boy Scout
And so,
age.
yeah. And what was your first solo trek, solo hike, solo walk? What was the first big one after? I mean, obviously you'd done probably more hiking prior to doing a big solo hike, but what was the first big solo hike?
Well, my first major hike, or what I was calling major hike back then,
Yeah.
which was about a 10-day solo, which a lot of people would still call a major solo hike. It came unexpectedly. I was going on a canoe trip with a good friend of mine up to the Boundary Waters Wilderness in the Yukon,
Mm.
and we had all set up but and was supposed to meet at LaGuardia Airport, and he didn't show up. And
Right.
tragically, the night before, he had a heart attack, even though he's only 44 years old.
Right.
And when he passed away, and then he had a funeral. Now, at that stage, I had all my time set aside. I had all my gear packed up, but I had no place to go. And so I was also rather sad, grief-stricken, if you want to call it that. And so I decided to go up to the Adirondack Mountains here in New York State. And I just roamed around for 10 days. I wasn't trying to go any place in particular. I would just get on the trail and walk it till I got tired, set up my tent, go to sleep, get up the next day, go someplace else. And when I got back home, I actually felt better. I actually I enjoyed it. Even though it was purely spur of the moment. I hadn't made any plans to go there. I just went up there and was walking around, and I said, "Yeah, I should do this more often." And who knew that more often was going to be, more than a half century of doing it, and still doing it.
Yeah, and that is your book, Way Out There: Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. That's what
Way
that
out
book
there.
Yeah, Way Out There. Yes, Way Out There. So tell us about that book. Again, that's one of backpackers' top books
It's
for trekking.
yes. May I tell you?
Please.
It's Backpacker has called it one of the 50 best hiking, trekking, and backpacking books of all time. I love that, of all time.
I love that.
Me, I never wrote a book before except for that. That's the one and only book I wrote. I really liked the book myself. In a sense that I had a great time writing it and reminiscing about all the trips and all the incidents and all the adventure that I had on all those treks. But I never, frankly, expected to get any kind of recognition that big. I mean, the book was selling well right from the beginning, but it's really an honor for me. I'm really humbled that so many people have read it and enjoyed it, and that backpacker liked it too.
Yes, of all time. It's so
Well,
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah.
So tell us one of the stories that's in the book.
Well, let's see. There's a so many. Okay.
Great.
I went to Peru, to the Andes Mountains, and I was interested in the descendants of the Inca. Now, I should say that a basic objective of most of my treks is to engage with people who live in remote areas, indigenous people, people living off the grid, people living a subsistence lifestyle. I have a degree in psychology, and I do social research. So that kind of got me interested in people. And then I can combine it with the adventure of trekking. And so that's what I do. And so I started to think one day about the Inca civilization in South America, in the Andes Mountains. And when people think of that, they usually think of Machu Picchu. But rather than going to a place where it's just deserted old buildings, I was told that if I went to a certain mountain called Alsangate and I walked around behind that mountain, if I could get back there, that there was still people living back there the way they were living 500 years ago. They were still living in sod houses. They were still wearing the same types of clothing. They were still herding
Beautiful.
llamas and alpacas. And that most of them probably didn't even speak Spanish, that they were still speaking Quechua, their language. I said, I got to go there. I got to see that for myself, And so I found an old map And when I say old, it was old. It was a terrible map. But I figured, well, if I get to this mountain, all I have to do is get around to the backside. That shouldn't be too hard. And so I went to Peru. I went to Cusco, the city, to acclimatize. I stayed there about 5 days or so, and then I went by bus for hours into the mountains, and I got off at the last stop, which was this tiny little village called Tinki. And I got off the bus. I could see the mountain in the background, and so I just put on my pack and started headed for the mountains. And it was tough. It was tough because the map that I had was totally useless, and there were so many game trails because of the llamas and alpacas there, and the weather was kind of sketchy, and so I couldn't take readings with my compass and try and triangulate to always ensure I knew where I was. And so basically I was following the trail or whatever I could around the mountain, but the map was useless. But sure enough, when I got back there they were, they were different.
Gosh.
They were like family groups. So maybe a dozen people, 15, maybe 20 people here. And then a little while later, another group of people. They still had llamas and alpacas. They usually traveled by horseback. So they had horses there as well. They were keeping their animals in corrals made of stone that they had built. And sure enough, most of them didn't speak. So now I was able to speak Spanish, which I could still, I grew up in New York City. And so to find, I found somebody there who spoke Spanish. And so I could translate, and he could translate to Quechua to Spanish for me. And the highlight of the trip was that I got to meet a shaman. And this guy came to El Sangate, the mountain, because it's a sacred mountain. And he came there to do a ceremony on behalf of a couple, as I remember, who wanted to have a baby. And he was there to ask the mountain gods to look down on this couple. And when he found out that I'd come all the way from New York by myself, not representing any university or museum, that I just because I was curious about how they live, he invited me to the ceremony, which they said hardly any outsider had ever seen, or that ever attends any one of these ceremonies. And so I did. It was fabulous, and it was another situation where, the people I meet, indigenous people, at first they can't believe that I'm there, that I'm there by myself, that I'm there coming from New York City. And a lot of them wonder, why are you here? And I tell them what I just told you. I studied your history. I studied your religion, your tradition, but I needed to come and see what it was like, on my own. And they can't believe it. But once they realize that this guy, just because of how they live, that this guy was curious enough to go there, they welcome me. I never had a negative incident with anybody I've been. I've been in the Australian outback. I've been in Alaska. I've been in Greenland, Iceland. I've been in Swedish Lapland, Norway, Finland. I've been in New Zealand, Maoris. I've been in Tasmania. Everywhere I've been, people were welcome me, because not only were they, amazed that somebody would come there, but it was also that they had never met somebody from New York. And so they were as curious of me as I was of them. It was great. I loved doing that.
Oh, it's so beautiful. So would you say what do you hope someone takes away from reading Way Out There? A sense of
I,
curiosity in the world?
well, that's the key right there.
Yeah.
I think that as long as you are curious, your mind will stay supple,
Yes.
and that you will continue to grow. And the other thing I like about it is that when you take these trips, yeah, in my case, I'm finding out about indigenous people and so forth. But in reality, I'm learning about myself.
Yes.
I'm learning who I am. I'm learning how
Mhm.
I handle adversity. I'm learning how I make decisions.
Mm.
I'm learning to be thankful that I'm able to do it, and
Yeah.
thankful for all the blessings that I have back home, which, my life is a lot easier back there. So I appreciate all the things that I have back home. And so it's a learning experience all the way around, outwardly as well as inwardly.
Yeah, it's beautifully said. Um, Tell us about your work with the Explorers Club and the committee you chair. Well,
Well, I've been a
tell the listeners what the Explorers Club is first.
yes, it's a club. You won't be surprised to know it's a club for explorers. Uh, it's a old club. It started in 1904 during what they call the Age of Exploration, which was the late 1800s to early 1900s. And so most of the founding members and original members from back in the day were Arctic explorers. They were looking for, well, the North Pole as well as the South Pole and the Northwest Territories and places that were off the map in Africa and what have you. And so it's a club dedicated to exploration and finding knowledge in the outdoors. And so I've been a member for quite a while. I was elected in 1993, so I'm like 31 years member now. I'm an emeritus member, um, and I've been on the board of directors
Mhm.
for several years now, and also chairing the diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. I was the one I was the first chair of that committee, first and only chair. We go back about 4 years now. This committee, and uh, and so the idea is to spread the word that explorers come in all different sizes, shapes, religions, colors, what have you, and to kind of dispel the notion that in order to be an explorer you need to be a male, probably Caucasian male, uh, and of course to to encourage people, especially young people, to consider a life of exploration, either via the sciences or even if it's an avocation like me. I tell people I'm just a curious guy with a valid credit card, and I'm willing to do what it takes. Um, but the knowledge is there to be had, and absolutely the planet nowadays, we need
Right.
people to go out there to find ways to help us be more sustainable and to prolong the health of the planet.
And I would argue that going hiking, trekking, walking, you can't help but fall in love with the planet when you're out there. And therefore, what we love, we want to care for. And so going for a walk is an act of, I think it's a radical act of, it's a love affair. Going for a walk is an expression of love for this planet and our ability to do it. Um, how would you recommend kids who live in urban areas get in touch with the natural world or find those outdoor spaces or be surrounded and wrapped in this beautiful natural world?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is just go outside.
Right.
Turn the
Yeah.
screen off, turn your cell phone off, whatever, and just go outside. Second thing is that once you get outside, to realize that You don't have to go to a national park. You don't have to go to a wilderness area. Any place that's, if it's an urban park or if it's along a beach or any place where
Right.
it's outdoors. And the reason that works is because if you do that and you realize that, it's a pretty healthy thing to do. And, it's a way of being in touch with nature. What'll happen is you'll begin to appreciate nature. You'll begin to say, um, this is something that needs to be protected. This is something that needs to be safeguarded. Um, you'll find yourself, probably picking up scraps of paper, that were just lying there. You never even noticed them before. You'll start to notice wildlife, birds, animals, even if they're just squirrels or what have you, that have always maybe been there, but you just never were aware of them. And so your perspective changes, when you spend time outdoors. And then, if you're like me or like a lot of other people, those little walks to an urban park, and the next thing you want to go to maybe someplace a little farther away, but someplace that's a little bit more pristine. So maybe like if you live in New York, like I do, the Catskill Mountains, are a 2-hour drive from here, and so you can even do it as a day trip. And so you'll be curious to expand your range in terms of how far you're going and how long you're staying out there, and it'll just build on itself. That'll
That's
be
right.
great.
I think that I so agree with what you just said. I also think there's what inevitably happens is we are, and you have said this, that you are grateful for the ability to be able to do it, the beautiful breeze on our face. There's a certain sense of gratitude that arises having done that. And also a sense of humility. I always find out in the wilderness or outside that I feel like I understand my place in this ecosystem, in this universe, and it's a lot smaller than than it really is. Say something.
I
Tell me, do you feel the same way?
I feel exactly the same way. There's a sense of humility out there, where you get the notion that you're just a tiny speck in a huge universe, and that no matter how important you think you are, and no matter how important you think that what you're doing is in the greater scheme of things, uh, it ain't that much. You do what you can do, but there is a definite sense of humility, uh, which I think is very important. I mean, and that's a good place
Agree.
to learn it, way out there. And
No.
but there's one thing I will never do. I shouldn't say never. I'll never say never.
Okay, what's that?
There's one thing I'm not going to do when I'm out there, and that is to get in freezing cold water like a friend of mine here, and have a smile on her face while she's in there. I look at a photo and I'm getting cold just looking. So I mean,
You know what?
I'll do a lot of things, but there's but there's some
Well,
things that I'm not going to do it.
I'm going to invite you to stay curious, JR. You were born curious. It's just water. I mean,
I mean,
you and I are likely to go for a hike sometime and see some beautiful lake, and we're going to be drawn to get in. So,
no, I won't say no, but
okay.
I don't know. I was up once in Swedish Lapland, with a bunch of reindeer herders. There was a pond there, and they was going like, "Come on, we're gonna just jump in for a quick." And I'm saying, I'm not doing a quick anything. I'm not getting wet. I'm not going in there. There were like chunks of ice floating around in there. And I'm going, no, man. I've been in grizzly country. I've been in polar bear country, wolves, any of that, no problem. But hey, no.
Hey, I mean, I guess there is a limit, but I don't know. Okay, so here's a question.
Okay.
If you were to choose, I've been driving across the US a little bit this past year, and just going to some of our national parks, which I mean, honestly, goodness gracious, just glorious. If you were to choose two U.S. national parks, well, I shouldn't even limit it to U.S., two national parks that have been incredibly inspiring or interesting to you, what would those be?
All of them. But
Yeah,
to
exactly. I agree.
relative to your question, um, I would have to say Gates of the Arctic National
Oh,
Park
oh,
in northern Alaska, which I've been to like 3 different times, uh, is way up on that list. And I would probably say Glacier National Park
mm,
because it was one of the first parks that I actually visited way back when.
mm,
And it's also unlike some parks, it's a it's a backpackers park.
mhm.
They have long trails, and it's not the only park like that. But it's just a good backpacking park. And when I first went there were actually glaciers in Glacier National Park. It's
Yeah.
unfortunately they're disappearing. But those two parks, and I've been to about 50 parks, so they're all great. I
They're
mean,
all great.
they're all great. And I would strongly recommend going to any of them.
Any of them. Well, I'd like to show you what I just picked up at the beginning of this year at my birthday, which is my national park senior
There you
card,
go.
JR.
There you go. I got mine.
I pull it out all the time, even if I'm not at a
Oh,
national park. Don't you want to see my senior card? It's so brilliant. It's
you're
one
not
of
a
my favorite
senior, are
objects.
you?
I am, yeah. So of
Okay,
course, I'm
well, get out of
62.
here. Get out of here.
62. As soon as I could get it, now I give it to everybody for their birthday. I'm like, everybody gets a senior card to go to the national park.
Yeah.
Okay,
Those
so
those
maybe,
cards are fantastic, by the way. If
oh,
anybody's listening who's a senior and you want to go to a park, get that card.
yes.
It's great. The discounts and everything that you get from that card, fantastic. It's a
It's
really good
fantastic.
deal.
It's called the America the Beautiful
American Beauty.
National Parks and Federal Recreation Lands Pass, lifetime pass.
That's
It's
right.
like it is definitely one of my most treasured possessions. But I would say the other thing, I find my question to you is what might I find in your pockets after a walk? When I go for a walk, I can't help myself. I see pine cones, I see a beautiful rock, I see trash, I pick it up. So what would we find in your pockets? I mean, aside from an obvious snack or two.
Well, you're going to say a pocket full of M&Ms.
Yeah.
They're always
Okay.
there, or a Snickers bar, something like that.
I mean,
Uh,
Snickers is the perfect food, actually.
yes, yes.
Perfect.
If you're with the Snickers company, you should hire me as your.
Yes.
I've been eating them for years. Uh, but yeah, the same thing. I'll see like an interesting rock, and how many millions of rocks have I seen, but sometimes there's just something that you see there. Uh, I do make it a point to always pick up garbage.
Yeah.
Um,
Too.
it's just, I always have a plastic garbage bag, and I'm willing to bend down and pick stuff up and put it in there. Uh, to be honest, a lot of my trips are in regions that are so remote that it's pretty
Yeah.
clean. There hardly anybody goes there, and there's not a whole lot of dirt there. But cigarette butts, anything like that, I always make it a point to pick up. And yeah, that's basically it. I got to leave some room for my Snickers bars and you know
I agree.
all my other good stuff, all my
All the
snacks. Uh,
Okay, so here's our last question, and thank you for taking this time. I could talk to you all day, and in
yeah,
fact,
ditto.
I feel like we should plan a hike together so that we could, in fact, hike all day, and I could use that time to potentially invite you to change your mind about getting in the cold water, but no pressure, no pressure. Okay, so my last question to you is, why does walking matter? I think it's such a powerful component of what makes us human. And it's if we are fortunate to be able-bodied, it's available to us regardless of where we are or what we're doing or where we live. I think walking really matters. I'd love to
Oh,
hear
yeah.
from you why it matters.
Well, for one thing, it's easy. You put one foot in front of the other. You don't have to go to school to learn how to do it. Everything comes natural. And so it's a way of transportation, of moving from one place to the other. Again, I like the pace of hiking. It's fast enough that I can go someplace while slow enough to be aware of what's going on around me.
Yeah.
It's obviously healthy. You feel a lot better after a good hike. And I think it's also a good break from whatever your normal life is, unless your normal
Mm,
life is hiking all the time, full time. But just to break the habit, just to do something different, just to
yeah.
change your environment, different scenery out there. And again, you don't have to go to the end of the earth like I do to get those benefits. You can get them anywhere. And in fact, if you're going to consider going out for a walk or a hike, consider bringing a young person with you.
Mm,
Consider bringing even an older person with you, or someone in a wheelchair. Anybody. Being
yeah.
outdoors is just a great place to be. And I like walking, and so it's all good.
Yeah, that's for sure. So well said. I think that's right. And the invitation to potentially bring somebody along is a really I mean, there's nothing quite like going for a walk with a friend. There's something about the pace and being together and being side by side versus say sitting across the table from
Right.
somebody. It just feels so generous and yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do. Well, thank you so much. You are absolutely wonderful. Let's figure
Uh,
out a hike together,
yeah,
and I
let's do
hope
it.
all
Let's do it.
yeah, I hope all the walk stars who are listening will go pick up a copy of Way Out There: Adventures of the
I got
Wilderness
wait.
Trekker. Let's see it. Yes. So
Uh,
beautiful.
uh,
Yes. And there you are in your beautiful red hat.
Red hat.
Uh,
Yeah, the red hat is
yeah,
always there.
that's right. And if you can, if anybody who's listening can find the film Born Curious, it's a absolutely beautiful film. And again, it's how you and I met. So I'm grateful to that
And I
film.
also
But,
have a website.
and yes, tell us that. Tell us where we can find you. Everybody can find you.
The best place is the website, which is jrinthewilderness.com. And from that website, it has connections to Facebook and Instagram and all the other social media, as well as a lot of other stuff. That dynamite photos there from all over the world.
Yes,
Um,
they are
so
dynamite
yeah,
photos.
jrinthewilderness.com.
Yes, everybody go check it out. And thank you. I hope you have a great
Yeah,
walk
Libby.
today. I am going to head up a mountain called Mount Tamalpais. I'm in Northern
Oh, I know
California.
that.
So,
Yes.
oh, yes. And then I'll email you and we'll figure out where we're going to go for a hike next.
Very cool. Yeah, it was great
Okay.
talking to you, Libby. Yeah,
It
have a
sure
good one.
is.
All right, take care.
Okay. Bye.
This Morning Walk is a production of Blind Nil Audio, hosted by me, Alex L.
And me, Libby Delana. Produced and edited by Chris Jacobs.
If you find value and meaning in the conversations that Libby and I have, please share the show with a friend and consider leaving a 5-star review. Comments on Apple Podcasts really help us out. When you do that, it introduces this show to a bigger audience. Thank you so much for listening.
You are wonderful. Have a great walk.
The views, information, or opinions expressed in this series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Chip and Joanna Gaines, Blind Nil Audio, nor Magnolia.